It all started with something so ordinary that most people wouldn't even think twice about it. Not a grand mistake, not some reckless decision, just a trash can. It was a Monday morning, like any other. Garbage trucks rolled through the neighborhood, their grinding engines and clanging lifts marking the start of another week. For Alex, it was routine. He rolled his trash can to the curb the night before, the way everyone did, and headed inside without giving it another thought. When morning came, he was already running late for work. He grabbed his keys, rushed out the door, and drove off, leaving the empty can at the curb. By the time he returned home that evening, the sun had already set. His stomach was empty, and his mind was too tired to worry about something as trivial as a trash can. He told himself, "I'll bring it in tomorrow." One night, that was all. But sometimes the smallest cracks reveal the biggest problems. The very next day, Alex checked his mailbox. Amid the usual stack of flyers and bills, there it was. An envelope stamped with the bold seal of the Homeowners Association. Inside was a letter, crisp and formal, as cold as a lawyer's warning. At the very top, in all capital letters, it read, "Violation notice, $500 fine." Alex froze. $500 for what? His eyes scanned the page until they landed on the reason: trash receptacle left visible beyond the approved collection hours. That was it. That was the crime. At first, he laughed in disbelief. It had to be a mistake. Surely nobody could be serious about fining that much over something so small. But the letter was firm, almost smug. Payment was due within 30 days, no exceptions. What kind of neighborhood did this even make sense in? This wasn't a gated mansion community with multi-million-dollar homes. This was a modest, middle-class subdivision. People worked hard, raised families, mowed their lawns on Saturdays, and yet, here was an HOA board, treating a simple trash can like a weapon to extract money. For Alex, it wasn't just about the money. Though $500 was no small amount, it was about the principle. He paid his dues every month. He trimmed his lawn, painted his fence, followed the rules like everyone else. But this wasn't about cleanliness. This wasn't about community standards. This was about control. Still, Alex decided to be reasonable. He sent an appeal. He explained it was a one-time mistake, that he'd bring the can in on time going forward. He asked politely if they would reconsider the fine. The response was swift and merciless. Request denied. The HOA claimed the fine was standard procedure, backed by a bylaw buried deep in the association's rulebook. They added a warning that if he failed to pay, late fees would accrue, and eventually, a lien could be placed on his home. That's when Alex realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. This was how they operated. And the more he looked around, the more he realized he wasn't alone. Neighbors whispered about similar fines. One family had been charged for leaving their holiday decorations up a day past the deadline. Another was fined because their flower pots were deemed unsightly. A man down the street had received a violation for parking his truck facing the wrong direction in his own driveway. Each story was the same. Ordinary people, hit with ridiculous fines, pressured into paying out of fear. Fear of escalation. Fear of losing their home. It wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about power and money. That's when something inside Alex shifted. At first, he had been frustrated, then angry. But now he was determined. This wasn't just about one trash can anymore. This was about standing up to a system that thrived on intimidation, a system that punished its residents not to protect the community, but to squeeze every dollar it could out of them. Alex decided he wasn't going to pay, not a dime. And more importantly, he wasn't going to let this go. If the HOA thought they could bully him into submission, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. But how? How could one man take on an entire HOA board that had the rule book, the lawyers, and the authority to ruin him financially? How could one homeowner flip the rules against those who wrote them? That's when he began to dig. He pored over the association's bylaws, the fine print that most residents never bothered to read. Page after page, rule after rule, Alex searched for something, anything, that might expose the hypocrisy of the board. And what he uncovered shocked him. Hidden within the dense bureaucratic language were contradictions, loopholes, and violations, not by the residents, but by the HOA board itself. They had been breaking their own rules for years, counting on nobody ever noticing. Suddenly, Alex saw a way forward. He realized that the same rules they were using to punish homeowners could be turned against them. That if he played his cards right, the very bylaws they hid behind could become the weapon that destroyed their grip on the neighborhood. The $500 trash can fine had lit a fire inside him. But what he was about to set in motion would burn much hotter. And it would spread much further than the board ever imagined. Because sometimes the biggest wars start with the smallest battles. And this was only the beginning. But here's the question. What exactly did Alex find in that rule book? What hidden detail would give him the power to fight back against an entire HOA board? And once the board realized he wasn't backing down, how far would they go to silence him? The answers were only just beginning to unfold. Alex sat at his kitchen table late into the night, papers spread out before him like a detective piecing together a mystery. On the surface, the HOA's rule book looked airtight, filled with line after line of restrictions, fines, and procedures. But the more he studied it, the more he realized something shocking. The board had grown careless. They had been so obsessed with controlling homeowners that they had overlooked their own compliance with the very bylaws they enforced. Alex's pen tapped the page as he read. There it was, a clause that stated all fines must be accompanied by photographic evidence of the violation. Yet when he looked back at his own violation notice, there was no picture attached, just words on paper, nothing more. Strike one. He kept digging. Another bylaw required that all board meetings be announced to residents at least 7 days in advance, and that minutes from those meetings be made available to the public upon request. Yet when Alex asked around, most neighbors had no idea when the board met. And when he requested minutes, he was ignored. Strike two. And then came the biggest revelation of all. Buried deep within the financial section, he found a rule requiring the HOA to provide an annual report of all collected fines and how that money was spent. This was meant to ensure transparency and accountability. But when Alex asked his neighbors if they had ever seen such a report, the answer was unanimous. Never. Strike three. The board wasn't just bending the rules, they were breaking them outright. And they were counting on the fact that nobody would bother to check. For Alex, this was more than a loophole. It was a weapon. He realized that if he could gather enough evidence, he could turn the board's own bylaws against them. He wouldn't just fight his fine, he could potentially unravel their entire operation. But there was a problem. Knowledge alone wasn't enough. If he wanted to expose the HOA, he would need proof. Hard evidence that they had failed to follow their own rules. Without it, they could dismiss him just as they had before. So Alex began quietly documenting everything. He kept copies of every letter. He made formal requests for meeting minutes. He asked neighbors to share their own violation notices. Slowly but surely, a pattern began to emerge. A pattern of neglect, abuse, and hypocrisy. And as word spread, something unexpected began to happen. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down started to come forward. Stories poured in. A family fined for leaving a small tricycle on their porch. A retired couple penalized for having their grass half an inch too tall. Each tale was another piece of evidence, another brick in the case Alex was building. The board, however, wasn't blind to what was happening. They began to notice Alex's persistence. Letters became sharper. Warnings escalated. Soon he received another violation, this time for improper storage of garden tools. A rake leaning against his shed. Nothing more. It was clear. They were targeting him now. They wanted to make an example out of him, to crush his resistance before it spread any further. But what they didn't realize was that every new violation only made Alex's case stronger. Each petty fine, each arbitrary rule, painted a clearer picture of an HOA drunk on power. The neighborhood was watching closely. Some whispered encouragement, others expressed fear, but everyone sensed it. A storm was coming. For years, the board had operated unchecked, their authority unquestioned. But now, one man had begun to pull at the threads of their carefully woven web. And with each pull, the fabric grew weaker. Yet Alex knew he couldn't act too soon. If he confronted them without enough proof, they would crush him. If he waited too long, they might find a way to silence him. Timing would be everything. And so, he planned. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting in person. He wanted to see how they operated behind closed doors, to witness firsthand the arrogance that had driven so many of his neighbors into silence. He wanted to stand in the very room where the decisions were made and quietly gather the evidence he needed. But what Alex didn't know was that the meeting he was about to attend would be unlike any other. The board was already preparing for him. They had seen the questions he asked, the requests he made, and they knew he was digging into matters they preferred to keep hidden. Behind the scenes, the board members whispered to one another. To them, Alex wasn't just a nuisance anymore. He was a threat, and threats had to be dealt with swiftly. The stage was set. On one side, a homeowner armed with persistence, principle, and a growing pile of evidence. On the other, a board accustomed to power, secrecy, and fear. What would happen when Alex stepped into that meeting room? Would he uncover the proof he needed to expose their corruption once and for all? Or would the board find a way to shut him down before his rebellion could spread? The answers lay ahead, just beyond the doors of that meeting hall. And once Alex walked through them, there would be no turning back. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and Alex felt a mix of nerves and determination pulsing through him. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering documents, organizing neighbor testimonies, and studying the bylaws until he knew them better than some of the board members themselves. But as he walked toward the community clubhouse, he couldn't ignore the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every homeowner who had been silenced, fined, or intimidated. This was about exposing a system that thrived on fear. The parking lot was unusually full. Word had spread that Alex would be confronting the board, and curious residents had shown up to see what would unfold. Some came to support him. Others came out of fear of being associated with him but couldn't resist watching. And of course, some came simply to enjoy the drama. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The board members sat in a row at a long table, papers stacked neatly before them. Their expressions were stern, their posture rigid. They were ready for him. The meeting began the way it always did. Minutes from the last gathering, budget reports, updates on neighborhood projects. But the room buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew why they were really here. Everyone knew that the routine business was just a formality, a prelude to the confrontation looming over the night. Finally, the moment arrived. The chairperson cleared her throat and announced, "Community concerns." This was the section where residents could voice complaints, questions, or appeals. Alex stood. The room seemed to lean toward him, every eye fixed on his movements. He carried a folder thick with papers, and as he approached the microphone, the tension grew heavier, almost suffocating. He began calmly. He explained his $500 fine, describing how he had received no photographic evidence, even though the bylaws required it. He held up the letter, showing the audience its lack of proof. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The board members shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Next, Alex spoke about the requirement for public access to meeting minutes. He asked the audience, "Has anyone here ever received the minutes from these meetings?" The room was silent for a moment. Then a few voices called out, "No!" Heads nodded. More whispers spread. Alex pressed forward. He pointed out the missing financial reports, the total absence of transparency about how fine money was spent. He described story after story from neighbors who had been fined unfairly, painting a picture of a board that acted not as caretakers of the community, but as rulers clinging to power. And then, he dropped the final blow. He revealed that he had filed a formal request with the county records office, asking for proof of the HOA's annual compliance reports. The result? Nothing. The board hadn't submitted the required documents in years. Gasps filled the room. Even those who had come just for the spectacle now sat forward in their chairs, wide-eyed. The evidence was undeniable. The board tried to cut him off, but Alex remained firm. Every attempt to silence him only made them look more desperate. The neighbors noticed. They saw the cracks in the board's armor. For the first time in years, the power dynamic shifted. The board wasn't in control anymore. Alex was. But with power came risk. One of the board members leaned forward, their voice sharp, accusing Alex of slander, of spreading lies, of undermining the community. They warned him that his actions could result in legal consequences. The threat hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Some neighbors looked away, afraid. Others clenched their fists in anger. Alex knew he had to tread carefully. If he backed down now, the board would crush him. If he pushed too far, they might find a way to retaliate legally. He was standing on a knife's edge, and one wrong step could cut him deeply. But he also knew something else. The board was afraid. He could see it in their eyes, in the way their voices wavered, in the way their hands fidgeted with papers that suddenly felt flimsy and useless. For the first time, they weren't the hunters, they were the prey. The meeting dragged on, the air electric with tension. Neighbors whispered, exchanged glances, and scribbled notes. Some even approached Alex afterward, thanking him quietly, offering their support, promising to stand with him, but Alex knew this was only the beginning. The board wouldn't let this go. They wouldn't accept defeat so easily. He had embarrassed them, challenged their authority in front of the entire neighborhood. And people like that didn't forgive, and they certainly didn't forget. As he walked home that night, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. Curtains twitched as he passed by. Shadows lingered longer than they should. He knew the board would retaliate. The only question was how. And he was right. The very next day, another violation notice arrived in his mailbox. This time, the reason was laughable. Lawn edging not in compliance. It was clear. They weren't going to fight him with logic. They were going to bury him in fines, hoping to break him under the weight of their harassment. But Alex was ready. With every violation, every letter, every threat, they only added more fuel to the fire he was building. He wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. He was preparing for war. The showdown at the meeting had been just one battle. The real war was still ahead. And as neighbors rallied to his side, as whispers of rebellion spread through the community, one question grew louder, echoing in the minds of everyone who lived there. Could Alex actually bring down the board? Could one man, armed with nothing more than persistence and principle, dismantle the system that had ruled over them for years? The answer would come soon. But first, the board was about to strike back harder than ever before. The meeting had shifted the balance of power, if only for a moment. Alex had stood in front of his neighbors, pointed directly at the board's hypocrisy, and for the first time in years, people saw the cracks in the facade. But power never gives up without a fight. And the board, they were about to prove just how far they would go to protect their grip on the community. The morning after the meeting, Alex found the first strike in his mailbox. Another violation notice. This one accused him of lawn edging not in compliance. A vague statement without any photograph, without any detail, just words on a page backed by another fine. Alex almost laughed. It was pathetic, obvious retaliation. But while he found it ridiculous, he also knew the truth. Retaliation was dangerous. They weren't just trying to punish him, they were trying to bury him. And it didn't stop there. Over the next week, letters came one after another. Improper placement of garden hose. Mailbox not adequately painted. Driveway surface showing wear. Each letter came with a fine attached, adding hundreds of dollars to a balance they demanded he pay. The numbers grew quickly, spiraling out of control. $500 became $1,200, then $1,800, then $2,300. And with each fine came the warning. Failure to pay could result in late fees, collection action, or even a lien placed on his home. It was clear. The board's strategy wasn't subtle. They were trying to scare him into submission, to drown him in debt until he broke. But instead of breaking, Alex grew stronger. Every violation, every letter, every petty fine, he documented it all. He photographed his lawn, his hose, his driveway, creating a paper trail that proved the board's accusations were baseless. And while he was building his case, something else began to happen. His neighbors started noticing the pattern. They saw that Alex's lawn was perfectly neat. They saw that his hose was coiled properly. They saw that his driveway was no worse than anyone else's. And yet, he was being fined relentlessly. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into complaints. And soon, Alex wasn't just fighting for himself. He had a quiet army forming behind him. But the board wasn't blind to this shift. They saw the neighbors watching, talking, questioning, and that made them even more desperate. So they escalated again. Late one evening, Alex returned home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across his front door. Final notice. Property in violation. The sight was humiliating. Neighbors had seen it. Cars slowed as they passed by. The message was clear. The board wanted to shame him publicly, to make him a cautionary tale, but the attempt backfired. Instead of scaring the neighborhood, it enraged them. People began to whisper not about Alex's supposed violations, but about the board's tactics. They started asking, if they can do this to him, who's next? The board, sensing control slipping away, doubled down. They sent him a legal notice threatening foreclosure proceedings if his fines went unpaid. It was a bluff. They knew the process would take months, even years. But to most homeowners, the mere mention of foreclosure was enough to send shivers down their spine. But Alex wasn't most homeowners. He had already anticipated this move. He knew they wanted to scare him into submission, but instead, their aggression only gave him more ammunition. Each new threat, each outrageous claim, was another piece of evidence for his case. Still, retaliation came with a cost. The stress was relentless. He slept less, ate less, felt the weight of the battle pressing down on him. Friends warned him that he was putting too much at risk. Family urged him to just pay and walk away. But Alex couldn't. He knew that if he gave in, the board would only grow bolder. And if he didn't fight now, nobody ever would. So, he made his next move. He began preparing to take his evidence outside the neighborhood, to the county authorities, to local reporters, even to state regulators. If the board thought they could intimidate him into silence, they were about to learn that their retaliation had only amplified his voice. But even as Alex plotted his next step, the board was plotting too. They weren't just content with fines and notices anymore. They were digging deeper, searching for weaknesses, looking for any angle they could use to discredit him. One evening, as Alex walked his dog, he noticed a car parked down the street with its headlights off. The same car had been there the night before, and the night before that. watching, waiting. It sent a chill down his spine. Was it paranoia? Or was the board truly keeping tabs on him now? And if they were willing to stoop this low, how far would they go? The retaliation had already gone beyond simple fines. Now it felt personal, targeted, dangerous. Alex knew the war was escalating, and he knew that the next strike from the board might not just be another letter in his mailbox. The question was, when it came, would he be ready? By now, Alex's battle with the HOA had become more than just a personal struggle. It was war. The fines piled up, the threats grew louder, and the board's desperation to silence him turned uglier with every passing week. But something else was happening too. The neighborhood was watching. And slowly, the tide was turning. At first, most residents had kept their heads down, afraid of drawing the board's attention. But as they watched Alex stand his ground, refusing to bend under the weight of retaliation, many began to feel something they hadn't felt in years: hope. Some stopped him on his evening walks, quietly thanking him. Others slipped notes under his door, sharing their own violation letters, their own stories of harassment. What had started as a one-man rebellion was becoming a movement. Alex knew it was time to escalate. The board was no longer just abusing him, they were abusing everyone. And if the community was going to fight back, they needed someone willing to take the first step into the wider world beyond their subdivision. So he made a decision. He began drafting a formal complaint to the county housing authority, attaching every piece of evidence he had collected. Photographs of his lawn, copies of violation notices, letters with no proof attached, requests for minutes that had gone unanswered, threats of foreclosure sent without legal grounds. It was a thick packet of documents, the kind that couldn't be ignored. But Alex didn't stop there. He reached out to a local investigative reporter who specialized in community corruption, the kind of journalist who loved nothing more than exposing bullies in positions of power. He handed over his evidence, hoping the story would catch fire, and it did. Within weeks, the neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. A reporter had been spotted interviewing residents, taking photographs of the community entrance, asking sharp questions about the HOA board. The board panicked. They sent out mass emails to residents, claiming that malicious rumors were circulating and warning homeowners not to cooperate with outsiders. But their fear was obvious. For the first time in years, the spotlight wasn't on the residents. It was on them. Then came the breaking point. The county housing authority responded to Alex's complaint, informing him that they were opening an investigation. They demanded the HOA provide records of all fines, meeting minutes, and financial reports from the last 5 years. The board had no choice. They could stall, they could resist, but eventually they would have to turn over the documents. And when they did, Alex knew what would happen. The truth would come out. Because hidden inside those files was the very thing he had suspected all along. The fines weren't just petty punishments. They were funding the board's personal projects. Neighborhood money was being siphoned off, spent without oversight, used in ways that had nothing to do with maintaining the community. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once feared the board now smelled blood in the water. The fear that had kept them silent was shifting into anger. And anger, Alex realized, was contagious. But with exposure came danger. The board was cornered, and cornered animals lash out. One evening, Alex returned home to find his tires slashed. Another night, his mailbox was ripped from the ground. At first, he wanted to believe it was random vandalism. But deep down, he knew. It wasn't random. It was retaliation. The intimidation tactics only proved his point. The board was terrified, and terrified people make mistakes. Alex leaned into the chaos. He hosted small gatherings in his backyard, inviting neighbors to share their experiences. These weren't just venting sessions, they were strategy meetings. Plans were discussed, petitions drafted, alliances formed. The neighborhood was uniting. But Alex also knew the board wouldn't go down quietly. With investigators circling and neighbors rallying, the board was running out of time, and that made them dangerous. And then, one night, the unthinkable happened. Alex opened his mailbox to find not a violation notice, not a fine, but a letter from the board's attorney. It wasn't vague, it wasn't a bluff, it was a lawsuit. The HOA was suing him for defamation. The document claimed that his false accusations had damaged the board's reputation and caused irreparable harm to the community. They demanded damages. They demanded silence. They demanded control. It was their boldest move yet, a direct strike meant to crush him legally, financially, and emotionally. Alex stared at the papers in disbelief. This was it. The fight had escalated to the highest level. It wasn't just letters and fines anymore. Now it was courtrooms and lawyers. But Alex wasn't afraid, because he knew something the board didn't. The evidence was on his side. The bylaws, the missing reports, the retaliation. It was all documented, all ready to be laid bare in front of a judge. The lawsuit was supposed to silence him. Instead, it would give him the biggest platform yet. The war had officially reached its breaking point, and when the final battle came, it wouldn't just decide Alex's fate. It would decide the fate of the entire neighborhood. The question was, who would win? The board, clinging desperately to its power, or the homeowner who refused to be bullied any longer? The answer was coming soon. The lawsuit was meant to break him. A carefully crafted weapon wielded by the HOA board to crush dissent and silence the rebellion before it could spread any further. But what they didn't realize was that by dragging Alex into court, they had just handed him the biggest stage imaginable. The news traveled quickly. Neighbors whispered in driveways, sent texts back and forth, speculated in hushed voices. Some were terrified. If they can sue Alex, they can sue any of us. But others saw it differently. If Alex wins, we all win. And soon the whole neighborhood was watching. The day of the first hearing, Alex walked into the courthouse with his head high, carrying a thick binder stuffed with evidence. He wasn't alone. A handful of neighbors had come to support him, their silent presence in the gallery a quiet act of defiance against the board. The HOA's attorney came armed with legal jargon and intimidation. They argued Alex had slandered the board, spread lies, and undermined the integrity of the community. They painted him as a troublemaker, a man trying to destroy what the HOA had built. But Alex was ready. When it was his turn, he didn't argue with emotion. He argued with facts. He presented the violation notices that lacked photographic evidence. He showed the unanswered requests for meeting minutes. He revealed the missing financial reports that were required by law. He even played recordings from neighbors who had been fined for ridiculous reasons. Violations so absurd they drew chuckles from the courtroom audience. And then, the knockout punch. Alex handed over the county housing authority's findings. The investigation he had triggered had uncovered years of mismanagement and unreported funds. Money collected from homeowners had been spent without transparency. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. The courtroom fell silent. The board's attorney stammered, tried to redirect, tried to discredit Alex. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The judge's expression grew stern. What had started as a simple defamation lawsuit had unraveled into something much bigger. Suddenly, it wasn't Alex on trial anymore. It was the board. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, publishing stories about the abusive HOA. Neighbors who had once lived in fear now came forward openly, emboldened by Alex's stand. The investigation widened, pulling in financial auditors, county officials, and legal authorities. And as the truth came out, the board's empire crumbled. The fines weren't just petty, they were systemic. Thousands of dollars collected unfairly, records doctored or worse, missing entirely. Meetings held in secret, decisions made without consent. The more investigators dug, the more corruption they unearthed. One by one, board members resigned. Some claimed ignorance, others blamed each other. A few tried to cling to power, but the walls were closing in. The homeowners, once silent and submissive, now demanded accountability. Petitions circulated, recall votes were organized, and in the end, the board collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. The lawsuit against Alex? Dismissed with prejudice. The judge's ruling was clear. His statements were not defamation, but truth backed by evidence. Instead of silencing him, the HOA had elevated him, turned him into the voice of the community. The victory was more than legal. It was personal. For the first time in years, Alex walked through his neighborhood without fear. No violation notices in his mailbox, no orange stickers on his door, no whispered threats of foreclosure, just neighbors nodding, smiling, waving, free from the shadow that had loomed over them for so long. But it wasn't just about him. The changes rippled outward. A new board was elected, one made up of residents who had grown tired of the old ways. Transparency became the rule, not the exception. Meeting minutes were shared openly, fines were reviewed fairly, and the money collected was put back into the community where it belonged. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. No community ever is. But it was finally fair. And Alex? He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't want a title or power or control. He wanted something far simpler. The freedom to live in his own home without fear of being harassed over a trash can, a hose, or a holiday light. Looking back, it seemed almost laughable that it had all started with one small mistake. A trash can left out overnight. A $500 fine that spiraled into a battle that shook an entire neighborhood. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes the smallest sparks ignite the biggest fires. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. And in the end, Alex proved what many had forgotten, that power doesn't belong to those who abuse it. Power belongs to those who refuse to be silenced. So, the next time the HOA sends a notice, the next time a Karen wags her finger, the next time someone tries to weaponize rules for control, maybe, just maybe, people will remember this story. Because one man, one trash can, and one $500 fine turned into something much greater. And in the end, Alex got the last laugh.